Sounds, music, radio, podcasts.
5 Live Boxing.
Welcome to 5 Live Boxing, just a few days after whatever it was that happened inside the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. I'm joined by Carl Frampton this week. Just quickly, Carl, what's your immediate reaction to what we witnessed in that ring?
I think bizarre, really, Steve, and that it wasn't like it was the tactics for me more than the result, because I kind of fancied AJ, but I was sitting on the fence a bit too, so it didn't surprise me that Usyk won. The tactics were strange. How do you outbox like a master technician like Usyk?
Tactics more than the result. We heard that a lot on the night, and especially when we left the stadium late after the fight. We'll also hear from Todd the Birth, the president of Top Rank. And he'll hopefully tell us what it means for a potential Tyson Fury and Anthony Joshua fight. It was a night of drama. It was a packed house, nearly 70,000. It was a glorious night. It was fantastic. It was brilliant. And then the first bell sounded, and AJ seemed to get every single bit of it wrong. What was the plan? I have no idea. Usyk looked brilliant at times, frustrating AJ and doing basically what he wanted. And he said after the fight, it was my best fight, but it wasn't my hardest fight. Carl, I'm not quite sure where to start in dissecting this fight. First of all, let's settle with the after timing. Was there anything about AJ that looked different, looked odd?
Well, he was smaller, certainly. And I think that was, in hindsight, to be as late as he was probably a mistake. But I didn't expect him to win the first round. I expected him to be behind after 6 rounds. And then I expected him to come on a little bit strong. And he did well about 5 and 6, didn't he? But
yeah, he did.
I wasn't surprised with the first few rounds. Usyk completely outboxed him because, like I said, he's a master technician. He's an unbelievable fighter. And I just thought that there was going to be a time if AJ had have used his weight and strength properly, it would have been too much for Usyk, but it wasn't.
So at what point, Carl, would you have liked to have seen a little bit more urgency in AJ's work? Let's talk about the specifics. I mean, I've made a note after 3, needs to be a bit more forceful. I made another note after 6, better round, but still needs to be a bit more forceful.
Yeah, well, I think there was. So I give the first 4 rounds to Usyk. Actually, I give the second round 10-10.
To AJ, AJ, yeah.
Yeah, it was a level round, and it was hard for me to split them in that round. But I think it was 5 and 6 I give the AJ, and it looked like here's the momentum coming. Maybe I've called it right here. He's going to be behind after 6 rounds. He's going to come on strong. But after he had them 2 good rounds, he couldn't maintain any sort of pressure. And, there's been questions asked about his lungs before. And when you're so big and muscular, it's hard to have the lungs to go and fight hard every round for 12 rounds. I just think that's something that AJ can't do.
No, and I think it's something that he realises he can't do. So at some point, after about, say, 7 or 8, my gut feeling is looking at it, there was some sort of crisis of confidence in him, in the sense that he wasn't sure how much he had left, as you say, his lungs, his stamina, because all 4 judges give him all 3 judges, give him the last 4 rounds. And it's really interesting, going into round 9, the way it was settled out. Howard Foster had him 2 up going in to round 9, okay, which I think is, I can't see 2 up, okay. But the American judge, who was handpicked by Usyk's people, they handpicked the American, not the Ukrainian, believe it or not, Steve Weisfeld. He had it a draw. Now, Weisfeld's the guy that we talked about last week on 5 Live, who had AJ losing going into what was the last round against Klitschko back in 2017. So he was handpicked for his basic quotes, it was a good pick. Let's put it that way, Carl. And he's the kind of pick that really probably should have been refused by AJ's team, but that's neither here nor there. Now, the Ukrainian judge had Usyk up by 1. So going into the 9th, it was a tight fight. One had it a draw, one had AJ up by 2, one had Usyk up by 1. So it was tight going into those last 4 rounds. And it's in those last 4 rounds where Usyk changes in some ways and just gets wildly aggressive. From about round 11 on, he becomes the brawler, and he's chasing AJ all around the ring. And I think that's the hardest thing for me personally to stomach and to accept, that I never visualized those last 6 minutes, Carl.
Yeah, I don't think Usyk, and especially towards the end of the fight, I don't think he was concerned about AJ's power. Certainly he was at the start, but towards the end he wasn't, and I think a lot of that's down to AJ himself. AJ's clearly a very powerful guy, and if he hits you clean, he could knock anybody in the world out. But when he was throwing his right hand, he was throwing it really short. Like he didn't want to overcommit, and I think that was in fear of being countered by Usyk, who did counter him well all night, with his right hand, his lead southpaw hand. But he never really committed. Just almost like gun shy, is what Dillian White says, and I think he called it right.
I mean, he never turned any of the punches. I mean, the jab itself was going out like he was jabbing a big bag or jabbing someone who was static at about 6'7". There was no twisting it, there was no spinning it, there was no angling on it, there was no power in it. It was a big thudding jab, but it was a Bruno-esque jab. It wasn't aimed at a guy who was a bit shorter and cleverer. And as you say about the right hand, I mean, there was another 6 inches on that right hand if he'd have let it go. I mean, I find that. And that was from the first round. That was before he was clipped. I found that astounding all night long. Yeah,
his right hand was falling shorter than his lead hand, his jab, and he wasn't putting any sort of. He just wasn't trying to commit with it in the slightest. But I think, we have to give Usyk credit for that the master boxer was countering him, and because of his style and because of what he was doing, that's the reason why AJ wasn't throwing it long. It was all a bit strange, and even in the corner, the advice, no urgency, and Rob McCracken, going out for the 11th round. I think the tactics were, let him come to you, block and counter and be clever. I think you're well behind in this fight. Well, I had him at that stage, behind.
Absolutely.
Knock him out. He needs a rocket up, and he's telling him that. That was strange.
Yeah, there was. I mean, there'd be lots of fingers. Well, the fingers were being pointed before Usyk had left the ring. I've got to tell you, they were being pointed, and this was being claimed, and this guy's name was being mentioned, and this was being mentioned, and there was. We'll hear from AJ in a second, but just quickly, there was a debate. An immediate debate was, and I know we make sure we don't overlook Usyk. You're absolutely right. He was making AJ do certain things, but. Did AJ have a particularly bad night, or was he simply exposed against a master craftsman? Where do you stand on it, or is there a bit of grey area in the middle, Carl?
Yeah, I think probably a bit of grey area in the middle, if I'm being honest. I think he can be better than he was, certainly.
Bingo.
But I think he was exposed a little bit, I think. And I was thinking, talking about AJ Fury and stuff, I was thinking a lot of boxers. You ask boxers, and they've always said Fury wins hands down. I was thinking, not so sure. I think it could be a good fight. Kind of favour Fury, but AJ's certainly in it. But after that performance, I do not see a way of him beating Fury, and to that extent, I suppose he has been exposed a bit.
No, you're absolutely right. Anyway, AJ did finally appear. He wouldn't do anything in the ring because he was concerned about damage to both eyes and whether there was real damage, and thankfully that there isn't. But he vanished backstage instantly, demanding a rematch, as he told Eddie Hearn, as he left the ring, Carl, instantly. But then he did finally appear. I mean, it was sort of 1:45 in the morning. And this is what he had to say, looking back on the fight and just throwing it forward just a little bit.
It was a good chess match. I'm a boxer, innit? I'm a box fighter. I wanted to outbox him, do certain things. And then, after that, my eye, man, just peaked in the 9th round. It was great lesson, though. Great lesson. I feel like the whole fight for me, for me personally, I'm just learning this game. I'm studying, I'm learning. It's part of the process. Eye closing up. As you said, 8 rounds are going well, and in the 9th, you hit a bit of a little issue happens in the fight. You've got to stay consistent. The other fighter starts putting up more pressure, starts picking up the pace. They could probably sense something in there. And then we'll come back again. I'll pick up from where we left off now, and then I'll come back and try to be better. I'm sure I'll be better the next one. I'm not a sulker. This is a blessed opportunity to be able to fight for the heavyweight championship of the world, to fight good fighters time and time again, for people to come out. So, it's a blessed opportunity. I'm not going to go home tonight and be crying about it, because this is war. It's a long process. Like, this isn't just like one fight and then I'm done. I've got an opportunity to go back to the drawing board, so I can't go back and sulk. That's wasting time. I'm going back to look at ways I can improve straight away. I've already been watching the fight and figuring out, I could have done that better already, in my mind anyway. So yeah, I'm not too bothered. But what I'm bothered about is how much better I can get. That's where I'm putting my energy. I'm not putting my energy into sulking. I'm putting my energy into ways I can improve.
It was certainly not a good chess match, in my opinion. Carl, now you've been there when you've lost and you've had to face the media and face some probing questions and deal with your own demons. So how did he sound to you? Was he trying to convince himself? Did he sound genuine? How did he sound to you?
Well, he sounded disappointed, which I'm sure he was, but a little bit of convincing himself that. I suppose he had a part to play in the tactics too, and he would have come up with them with his team and agreed with them that he could be outboxing. But he called himself a box fighter. I suppose he is, but in comparing him to Usyk, he's not. And when you have the size, when you're the size of Anthony Joshua and you have the attributes that he has of his speed of hand, his power, his strength, you've got to use it, and he didn't use it once. There was very few clinches in the fight, and even when there was clinches, he kind of just a couple of times he let Usyk walk him back to the ropes, and it was just all a bit strange. And I think that the whole situation about the eye as well. He mentioned his eye closing up,
in the night from the ninth on. Yeah,
but it didn't close up, and unless there's an issue, a fractured eye socket or something like that, which there wasn't, then there was no. His eye was fine, absolutely fine. It was a little bit of swelling. It was open. He could still see. So I don't think he should mention his eye again, because it just looks a bit. I don't know.
I would imagine, to be honest with you, that in future interviews the eye will be dropped, because that's what I'm doing. It's not quite David Hay and the toe, don't get me wrong, but I would definitely be I'd be looking to drop that eye. Just a couple of things quickly. The weight issue. Now, he was 10 pounds heavier when he fought Vladimir Klitschko. He was 3 pounds or so lighter when he beat Ruiz, and this is the exact same weight he was when he fought Pulev. So he was light. It was not the lightest he's been in any of his 11 defences. But I understand what you're saying. He could have been 10 pounds heavier and been comfortable. But then the second part of this very long question to you is, you're absolutely right to spot it. On the few clinches that did happen, it wasn't like he manhandled Usyk. No. It wasn't like he pushed Usyk's head down and tried to manhandle him. As you say, he allowed himself to be moved back to the ropes. Yeah. What's going on there, Carl?
Yeah, I don't know. And I think that's something that I kind of said, being asked about the fight before the fight happened. What does AJ have to do? And I said he has to impose his strength, and push him down. Look at how Vladimir Klitschko fought all the smaller guys. He hit them, he held them, he pushed them down, and he just drained their energy. AJ had the chance to do that, and he didn't even attempt it.
Now, what about the counter argument to that is that Usyk's so clever, so smart that AJ couldn't get through. I mean, I don't buy that argument, but I'm throwing it at you, devil's advocate.
Well, try it. You have to try it, because what he was doing wasn't working. So you have to change things, and it's very important to think all good fighters are adaptable, and they're able to adapt and change tactics mid-fight. But that wasn't the case. That wasn't the case at all. And I feel for AJ a bit, I feel for him, because the spotlight's on him, and everybody, all the casual fans. I hate that term, casual fans, but the guys that aren't hardcore, they all just expected this to be a walkover, and he'll beat Usyk up because he's a warm up for Fury. And a warm up for Fury, but knowledgeable boxing fans like you and me knew it wasn't a gimme, and it certainly wasn't.
Now, before we talk about Usyk specifically, I made a note when I was sitting around yesterday thinking about what to ask you today. Who was, and a simple question, who was he listening to? Because before the fight, Del Boy had been inside his camp and he had told him all the things not to do and all the things that Usyk does well. Tony Bellew had been in his camp and had been very open about telling AJ all of the good things that Usyk does and all the things that AJ mustn't do. Now, my understanding is AJ didn't listen to anything about all of the good things Usyk does, and it seemed to ignore all of the things that he was advised to do. And all of those were get close, hold him, whack him to the body, don't give him a second, crowd him, use your physicality, hit him with a big jab, and just push him back. I mean, that was what everyone said. Eddie Hearn talked openly about it all week, about he's got to make a dent in him. So who was he listening to? Because we'll move on to how brilliant Usyk is in a moment, the Ukrainian marvel, don't get me wrong. But who was he listening to then? That he seems to have not done anything that all of us wanted him to do.
It must have been McCracken. McCracken's the head trainer, and he's the lead man in the corner doing the talking, and even, you know, even the instructions and the advice he was being given so late in the fight, it was just all a bit lackluster and laid back and like no urgency in the corner at all. And we knew what he had to do, and people are telling him what he had to do, and he it's almost like he was out to try and say, well, hold on, I can beat this guy that way, but I can also outbox him because I'm a superior boxer, which you're not.
I'm a box fighter.
Yeah, and you know, you can do that against guys like Pulev who are slower on their feet and don't move around, and Dillian White and that sort of style, but you can't do it against Usyk, who's, you know, he's unbelievable, like his style and I suppose a bit like Lomachenko. It's a unique style. There's not too many that fight like him, and it's just hard to deal with him.
Yeah, but unlike Lomachenko is not ever going to be in with someone that's got such enormous physical advantages. Lomachenko is going to be in with a guy who might be a naturally bigger lightweight, but we're only talking about several pounds and an inch or so. Whereas AJ did, I mean, this is the thing. This is what Bellew said. You know, this is what Chisora said. He's brilliant. He's great. But he's not faced anybody as big and powerful as AJ. And surely there was one moment in the second round when he let a couple of left hooks go. And they both brushed Usyk's chin. They missed him, but they were good shots. And it caught Usyk out, the fact that AJ had moved over to the left to throw the left hook. And they were big old shots, don't get me wrong. They both missed. But it was a good idea. He never threw the shot again. And those to me were about the only two punches in the entire 36 minutes that were thrown with real venom and thrown with every ounce of his power. Now, Usyk may have negated that by going the other way. He may have wiped out that advantage. But surely at some point you try and stick some shots in and around his body, Carl.
Yeah, you've got to and really get close. Like you know, hindsight. I was going to say hindsight's a wonderful thing, but we knew he had to get close.
Exactly.
You know, it's not, you can't outbox this guy. Especially, you know, AJ can't outbox Usyk just because he's not that type of fighter. But there was so many strange things. Even he was being countered with Usyk's kind of right hand, his jab hand, a lot. And the same thing he was doing, he was throwing it low, like kind of pretending to go to the body, a little feint, and looping it up. And he hit him every time with it nearly. And
it was a great shot.
Yeah. After, you know, you get hit with two or three of them and you don't get hit with them again. He continued to be hit with them. He just couldn't figure them out.
Yeah. Usyk also knew what we knew, that AJ had to get close. And it was like Usyk had the plan. He had that ability. He seemed to master the ring. He managed to find a position, Usyk, where he wasn't trapped on the ropes more than 2 or 3 times. It was a brilliant performance from him. But at the same time, Carl, I don't want to downplay his performance. It was what we expected him to do. Yeah, look, of course, I think Usyk was probably expecting AJ to come like stronger and faster and harder than he did. And he was surprised by his tactics. But talking about Usyk being able to maneuver and not be forced back to the ropes, I suppose he did. But he wasn't, there was no presence from Joshua pushing him back or trying to force the issue or trying to rough him up. And Usyk must have been just, you know, going back to the corner after 4, 5, 6 rounds, whatever, thinking this is a lot easier than
than it's meant to be.
Yeah, Usyk apparently was told after going into 9, 10, 11, basically the equivalent of don't get greedy, don't try and knock him out. You're winning comfortably, you're dominating it, don't get stupid. Of course, there were moments, certainly in the last 15 seconds, when the fight could have been stopped, when he did seem to say, listen, I'm going to go for it.
Yeah, look, and I think for Usyk anyway, that would have been the icing on the cake. And absolutely, this fight and the defeat was a big enough loss for AJ and a big enough disaster. But imagine he gets stopped in the last round. It's complete disaster for the whole team. So, I just think he needs to reevaluate everything. There's a lot of people around him. The advice in the corner was wrong, in my opinion, and most people's opinion. He's against Usyk. You're not a boxer fighter. You need to be a big powerhouse juggernaut. We've seen Derek Chisora give him so many issues, and Derek Chisora isn't half the fighter AJ is, but it's because he has that kind of Joe Frazier-esque, like marauding style. But we just needed to see a bit more of that from AJ, and we didn't see it.
A bit more of that from AJ. That might be the final word on that. Usyk himself, though, as you say there, I mean, he didn't quite get the stoppage, which would have been an incredible end to an incredible sequence and short career so far. All of those amateur titles, European champion, world amateur champion, gold obviously on the same weekend as AJ got his gold back in London, and all those great victories on the road, winning and then unifying the cruiserweight, and then this final one, well, not final one, this latest one in front of nearly 70,000. I mean, we always look at Lomachenko's record as being a great record, a great set of statistics, but we might need to start seriously reevaluating Usyk, because that was an impressive addition to what's already a very impressive record.
You look at the list of opponents, and already in his already short career and what he's done, completely undisputed at cruiserweight. Now he's went up and absolutely handily beaten the top. Depending who you're speaking to, people would have had AJ 1 or 2 as the best heavyweight in the planet, and he's just beaten him with ease. So I think I love watching him. I love him. I love everything about him. I love his character. I love how he fights. He's just. I think he just became a superstar. We all love him as boxing fans, but in terms of globally and what he's going to do to the wider kind of not just boxing fans but sports fans, this guy's just kind of became a superstar, and people are going to see his personality and his character, and I think they're all going to like it.
But let's say you're talking to somebody that knew nothing about boxing, and he heard you say that, or she heard you say that, and her or his question would be quite simple: what makes him so good, then, Carl?
What makes him so good? As a boxer or his personality? Everything.
But listen, do it in two compartments.
I think his movement, his ring IQ is it's spectacular. It's him and Lomachenko. It's like they're the best 2 technicians in boxing for me at the minute. But it's more than that with Usyk, and he's really, really, really likable. And you look at some of the interviews he does, the broken English and getting words wrong. I am very feeling stuff. It's funny. I seen him in when AJ fought Ruiz in New York, and when you see people kind of on the screen and kind of performing and acting up to cameras, but there was no cameras around, and he walked into the hotel, and his girlfriend or his wife or whoever it was he was standing with at the bottom of the at the lift, and he was annoying her and dancing around her and doing this mad dancing, he's like a big child trying to wind her up, and she was getting fed up, and I thought it was brilliant. But he's a great character. I love everything about him.
That's because he's brave enough to do that in front of his wife. And no disrespect to you, Carl, but you're not. I mean that in the nicest possible way.
You're right.
You can take that personally if you like. In fact, there's an interesting story from that Ruiz fight, the fight in New York, June the 1st, 2019. Obviously, in addition to it being a great ending and a mad night, we had a great night on 5 Live, myself, you, the Zone Costello, as we call him, and David Hay. But I saw something from Michael Conlon, and Michael Conlon said he was sitting near Usyk, And apparently when the fight was over, Usyk was really upset because he felt that he'd lost this massive financial fight coming up, because he was already at that point knew, because his people were already working with Matchroom, and he'd already been on shows, Matchroom shows, that he was working towards this giant fight with AJ that fell out of bed. Now that's really interesting, because that tells me he's had AJ in his mind at least since June the 1st, 2019. Nearly 2.5 years of concentrating on a man you might meet. That gives you a bit of edge as well.
Yeah, and I think that's another thing and I think it's another thing that boxers get wrong, is they don't have long-term goals and plans, and you hear them talking about, I'm only thinking about the next opponent. And while you should focus on the next opponent in terms of who you're fighting and be prepared to fight him, you should always have an idea of future and the future opponents that you want to fight as well. And clearly Usyk has his eye on AJ, like so many other fighters have had for such a long time.
On the subject of future fights and other fights, one of the other things that Alexander Usyk managed to achieve in 36 minutes at Tottenham Hotspur's stadium late on Saturday night was the fact that and it's a cliche, he blew open the heavyweight division. The planned fight with Tyson Fury, there's an asterisk attached to that, and the simplicity in theory of what might have happened next year. Of course, that might all change on October the 9th, when Fury and Deontay Wilder fight for the third time in Las Vegas. Well, I needed a bit of clarity on this, so I spoke to Todd the Birth, the president of Top Rank, the man who will take over from Bob Arum, who's 90 this year at some point. Not that Bob's going anywhere anytime soon, and that's for absolute sure. And Todd's flying over this week because obviously Top Rank have got to deal with Sky, and they've got all those great through the night fights. But I managed to grab him before he left for the airport. And the first thing I asked him was, what was his immediate reaction when he heard the result of Usyk against Joshua?
You know, my matchmakers sent me it was in the middle of the afternoon here for me, and I was going to come back and watch the fight, and I saw the result, and they said, I told you. And one of my matchmakers thought that Usyk would give him a really, really tough fight and possibly win a really, come down the stretch, had a chance to finish him. And I was like, he said almost had him out in the last two rounds. And I was shocked. Yeah. I was shocked. And I was like, are you serious? Usyk is so much bigger, and you have a smaller, and AJ is this and that. And so I got the result from them. So I was very shocked.
Yeah, because that's about what it was here. You know, we all knew that Usyk, the best Usyk, was capable of beating Joshua. We all knew that, don't get me wrong, but when you sit down and watch it, Todd, it's close to an old-fashioned boxing masterclass. Now, Todd, what I'd like to ask you, and I didn't think I'd be asking you this question because we set this interview up before the fight actually happened. I thought we'd be talking about what might happen next year, so I'm still going to ask you about what might happen next year. Does this affect any of the paperwork or any of the verbal agreements or written agreements for a Fury and Joshua fight next year? Does the loss affect it?
Well, I mean, I think the whole division is affected by it. I mean, I don't think paperwork or agreements have anything to do with it at this point. You now have a new dynamic or a new player, a significant player in the heavyweight division. And we've talked about this over the last 2 years. This is a real renaissance for the heavyweight division. And as a result of that, I think it's very important for everyone to take notice of it. And Tyson and Deontay Wilder have a tough fight, October 9th. And you never know what can happen. Deontay is such an incredible one-punch knockout guy, and anything can happen. So I think we really have to be careful to see, to make judgments. I think it's almost like Yahtzee, right? You throw the dice back in the back in the can, and you're going to roll it again. And there could be new play, new pairings that happen the whole time.
We've been rolling those dice for an awful long time, it seems now, Todd. I mean, I know that it's a situation where there's lots of different people involved, and now there's even a new fighter in the mix. It just seems to be going on and on and on forever.
I would say this, my feeling is I think we went through an era with the Klitschko brothers where there was some stagnation, right? And it was, the titles were held in Germany. They were just put over there. They were kind of, locked up over there, and they brought their, they came out occasionally out and did some stuff. But I mean, it was at least a decade where it was controlled by that. And I think now what we're looking at is this scrambled effect where it isn't the king for 2 terms of a U.S. presidency, right? It's maybe, a couple year term, and, the shorter terms and a quicker rollover. And, that all adds interest, right? And I think the interest in anybody can beat anybody on any night is a dynamic that is fascinating and makes the sport really unpredictable.
Absolutely. And I don't want to say that what would make it even spicier is Deontay Wilder getting revenge for last February. I don't want to say that, Todd. I don't want to say that, but it kind of would. So do you think, and I'm asking you to put your fans' head on here, okay? Because I know that in addition to your role at the Top Rank, your long-standing and impressive role there, I know that you're also a fan. With your fans' head on, do you think we'll ever see Fury and Joshua, or have we, as the expression goes, missed the boat?
I think you have I absolutely do think you have a chance to see it. I mean, I think that, people are very forgiving. People, I remember when we said, are we ever going to see, Lewis and Tyson? And it ended up happening. May not have been in the prime of both of their careers, but it ended up happening. So I think there's a dynamic that we really, it isn't predictable on a timeline, but it is predictable that the match makes sense because of them both being the kings from the UK. So, or were the kings or something like that. So it makes sense. It kind of has a rhythm to it.
Yeah, once they were British kings to steal half of a label from a film. That's the truth. I mean, basically, Todd, you're right there. We're in the middle of some kind of crazy renaissance here, like some kind of 70s thing where we've not just got 1 or 2 heavyweights, which we seem to have for so long, or 3 or 4. We're up to sort of 4 and 5 and 6. This is a glorious time to be a boxing fan, and it's not a bad time to be a boxing promoter.
No, I think it's. I think what we're seeing, it is a great time to be involved in the sport of boxing. The globalization of it is fascinating. I think the Olympics this past year were a little disappointing because of just the coverage of the Olympics in general was and that's always been a wonderful breeding ground and platform for us. So that's a little bit of a miss, but I think you have a lot of people are seeing the success of it. They're seeing the interest. We're seeing YouTubers that are coming into the space only as a way to have a contest, but they're actually adding interest to the Gen Z category. So that's interesting. Not saying it's part of boxing. It's just expanding.
Well, it's interesting.
It's expanding the awareness of the sport. And that is a wonderful proposition to be a part of. Those YouTubers could go play checkers, or they could go play one-on-one basketball or cricket, and people would tune in. It's not about boxing, but it's about their fan base. But we're just getting exposed more and more. And I also think, us being on ESPN in the United States, which has been for the last couple of years, and then us, and Sky having a wonderful
new deal.
Yeah, a wonderful platform where you're talking about the 2 big sport, carriers, global carriers in the world, creating awareness and showing the highest level of fights. I think that helps. It abuts the Premier League, it abuts the Championships League, it abuts the NFL, NBA, everything.
Todd, and finally, was there any concern at the late arrival, how late Tyson arrived? I know he had to be bedside with his daughter, who, of course, was in intensive care for a period, but was there any concern with you or with Bob or with any of you other guys inside the Top Rank organization?
I think the concern that we see is a bit of a different concern, right? Obviously, health and safety for him is the most important, and what he feels the most prepared for is that is his 100%, commitment to. Our concern is a little bit different. Our concern is, it's a postponed bout. We had a lot of momentum coming in July, and we want to restart the engine, right? Restart the motors, get the dialogue going, get the everybody talking. So that's what we wanted to do. And, I think he's here. We've been getting some access to him. And obviously he has to be very careful with people exposing, in the gyms and things like that. We're getting some stuff out there. Our marketing push will start in the next couple of days. So I really, in these last couple of weeks, and I think that was our biggest concern. But I think that he's at peace of mind. His training is good and he feels comfortable is the most important.
And finally, it's just a goodbye. Make sure you enjoy this fight, because it's really odd to see 70,000 people back in a stadium and singing. Forget the result. Just enjoy the event and think we've got some of those coming, Todd.
I heard it was wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. I heard it was a terrific event.
And that's what we'll do. With fingers crossed, that's what we'll do next year. We'll have Top Rank in the UK. We'll have Tyson Fury and Joshua, and we'll have 90,000 people outdoors. How does that sound, Todd?
Sounds terrific. I really appreciate it.
Hey, enjoy your flight and speak to you soon. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for all the support you give to the boxing fans all over the world.
Todd the Birthday. Now, we'll talk about Top Rank's new deal with Sky, and we'll also talk about the Chris Eubank Jr. fight, which launches Sky Mark 7, Mark 8, which is this Saturday. And when we talk about that in a second, but let's deal specifically what Todd said there about he could still see Fury and AJ fighting each other, a little bit like Lennox Lewis against Mike Tyson, a fight that happened, 6, 7, 8, maybe even 9 years after it should.
Yeah, it's a shame, isn't it? And I think that's, I suppose, what we were all worried about as well. But, Fury's in a tough fight himself in a few weeks' time. Although he should have won the first fight that was called a draw. He blitzed Wilder in the second fight. Wilder's always got a chance because he's the most fierce puncher maybe there's ever been. So he's always got a chance. And I think now the only way that the AJ and Fury fight happens anytime soon is if Fury loses as well. And I think that probably brings it a bit closer. But if Fury wins, he just moves on. I think the split and stuff. You have to talk about all these sort of things. What's the split going to be in a AJ versus Fury fight?
Now, what's the split going to be now?
It can't be close anymore. And will AJ fight for something he thinks? If he's getting a bit more and Fury's saying, I'll give you 30%, he might just say off. I don't know.
Yeah, because the deal, remember, when it was finally agreed and set and signed back in sort of April and May, and when it was officially announced, because it was officially announced, remember, for August the 14th in Saudi, you have to imagine that contract, which, Todd was a little bit vague about, understandably so, it's not a criticism. You have to imagine that contract's out the window, so a new contract comes in. And in theory, that contract right this minute would look different to the one that we might see on October the 10th, as you say, because Wilder could very well beat Fury in their third fight. There's an awful lot of unknowns going forward in the heavyweight division. But overall, Carl, I think that what Usyk's done has maybe opened up things a little bit more. Had AJ had a guy like Otto Wallin in the ring, or Tom Schwartz in the ring, or an ancient Luis Ortiz in the ring, you can imagine he walks through them comfortably, beats them comfortably, and we stay on course for more confusion next year. So let me just throw a couple of things at you. Frank Warren has talked on BBC Radio this weekend about how he believes that AJ, not that he promotes AJ, shouldn't take up the rematch clause, shouldn't invoke the rematch clause of Usyk, and that he should go straight to a Fury fight next year. That's understandable. He may have no say in that. My understanding is that AJ's definitely going to invoke the rematch clause. A rematch clause, by the way, that Usyk and Usyk's people insisted on, because as they said to me last week when young Jack and I went to interview them in Stratford, of course we'll win. Then we'll come back and we'll win again. We'll make plenty of money. I won't do Ukrainian accents. I get in trouble. So that's what Frank Warren wants. But of course that suits Frank Warren, understandably. He's a promoter and he has to suit himself because he's in charge of Joe Joyce, and Joe Joyce is well overdue, in quotation marks, for a WBO title fight against Usyk. How do you see, or how can you see things opening up in the next 6 to 12 months, Carl?
Oh, I don't really know. And you've got to feel sorry for guys like Dillian Wade and Joe Joyce who are kind of waiting in the fringes. And now there's going to be a rematch between AJ Usyk, it looks like. We've got Fury Wilder coming up. God forbid Wilder wins. Then there's going to be another fight there, and it's just held up and tied up even longer for the guys waiting. But I don't know. What do you think about the rematch with Usyk? What would you say to the AJ? Do you think I don't see a way he can win it?
Well,
I really
listen, I don't see a way. I don't see a way he can win it if he has the same mentality and anything like the same stuff he had the other day. Because Usyk's always going to be a passive and relatively light AJ. I agree with you. But here's the thing, Carl. What if he were to pull it off? I know we're talking about semi-fantasy, but I'd suggest that would be one of the greatest revenge missions in boxing history. Yeah. Far better. He was beating Ruiz in the first fight. He gets clipped on the chin. So it's quite simple going into the second fight. Don't get clipped on the chin and you can box his ears off. And he pulled it off. There's nothing simple about fighting Alexander Usyk. It would take the greatest performance of AJ's life. And people will be screaming listening to this saying, it can't happen, Bunsey. Hey, listen, anything's possible in boxing.
Especially with a big man. Anything can happen. But
bingo.
But he has to employ a style that will make his lungs feel like they're coming out of his mouth. He needs to apply loads of pressure and put it on Usyk. And I just don't think he has the makeup and the tank to be able to do that. But in saying that, he's a big, powerful man. If he's maybe not as gun shy in the next fight and he clips Usyk, it could be over. It's difficult for me right now after that performance from Usyk to see a way AJ wins. And I think you're right in what you said. If he does win, what a win it would be for AJ.
You know what's really interesting? I looked at the list of the people that AJ sparred with. Now, of course, he's fighting a southpaw, so you need some southpaw sparring. I agree with that. Yeah. But he managed to get in guys that were not great big punchers, and they were not even big cruisers, and some of them were small heavyweights. And I just think, that great scene in about Rocky 2 or 3 when Apollo Creed takes Rocky Balboa to that gym. I think it's the Hoover Street gym in Los Angeles. Yeah. And Rocky's in the gym. He's the only white man in the gym, and everyone's glaring at him. They just want to take him on. It's obviously some sort of, it's like it's a homage, if you like, to the Kronk gym and what Andy Lee and other guys felt when they went into the Kronk gym. And there's this great scene where Apollo, it's just a great line, and he just says, I need you to rediscover what these guys have got. You've got that eye of the tiger into the song, Bosh, and the rest of the movie is just fabulous junk, as you know. And I just think, for a rematch with Usyk, and I'm intrigued to hear what you say there, try not to be so technical. So in all fairness, get rid of all the technical sparring, all of the moving around this southpaw jab, the counter with saying that's not what you do. You know what? Go completely against the grain. Get half a dozen big old American lumps in and smash the granny out of them for 6 weeks. Get your confidence up. Smash them. Leave them blooded on them. Hey, it worked for Lennox all the time. Yeah. It worked for Tyson. It worked for Muhammad Ali. They smash people to bits in training.
Look, he's got to be a big brute. That's what he's got to do.
Exactly.
In the next fight. And we didn't. It was all just too nice, wasn't it? Really?
Yeah.
The tactics and everything, and even in the clinches, like I did say earlier, there was no hitting them in the back of the head, hitting them in the kidneys, throwing them around, pushing them down. There was none of that, and I think a lot of that was probably down to it takes a bit of energy to do that, and AJ didn't mind being clinched and held on and having a little bit of a rest, but it just needs. At times, it just in that fight anyway, he just needed He just needed a bit like a rocket up his backside. Yeah. Just being told is what you need to do. You need to be more forceful, and he wasn't able to do it.
Now you mentioned earlier on Dillian.
He wasn't told. Sorry,
he wasn't told to do it. Yeah, and you mentioned earlier on there Dillian Whyte, who of course famously went 1,000 nights. Sounds biblical. Waiting for a world championship fight that didn't come around. Then he got chinned by Povetkin. So then he chinned Povetkin. So he's back waiting now. He's probably 1,200 nights. Does this help White, the win for Usyk at the weekend in any way, shape or form? And does it help Joe Joyce in theory in any way, shape or form, in your opinion, Carl?
I really don't know. Well, if AJ takes the rematch, it delays them fights for a while. The world titles are tied up. Well, them 2 world titles are tied up with Usyk. Fury, Wilder, they're tied up with Fury. At the minute, if Fury gets chinned, I don't expect them to, but it wouldn't surprise me. Yeah. In this division, then there's going to be a 4th fight there. There'll have to be. Like the boys could be waiting for a while. So I don't really know. It's going to be really interesting just to see how it pans out for everybody. Yeah. But I feel for him. I feel sorry for him. It could be. It's like I remember getting I remember getting sent to the bakery when I was a kid. They asked for a long wait. Could be one of them.
Yeah, exactly. You know, the one thing that does strike me is that there is every chance that the WBO might get a bit bold and a bit brave, and they might deliver a bit of an ultimatum to Usyk, and he could, in theory, drop that one. He'd still keep 2 belts. I mean, Tyson Fury, as I wrote this morning or the other day in the Independent, after the fight, Tyson Fury was stripped, basically, I think, of his WBA title, his IBF title. The morning after beating Vladimir Klitschko, as I said, he hadn't even ordered his poached eggs, and he'd already lost one of the belts, for God's sake. So that could also happen, which could also, I don't know, does that damage things, or does it keep things active and give men a break?
It frees things up for the other boys if that's what happens. Yeah. And do you know what? I never even thought of that. I kind of went over my head, but like a lot of things do. But I never thought that. Never thought that. But I suppose if he has to vacate, it would be a bit unfair as well. It would be a bit unfair to Usyk. But this game is never really fair, is it? And
no, never at all.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see what happens.
So we know that there'll be all sorts of fights happening and all sorts of alternatives and all sorts of routes. But could you imagine in 18 months, after maybe 3 or 4 or 5 heavyweight fights, could you imagine a situation where it's Usyk who's got all of the belts and Usyk who is the king of the heavyweights?
Do you know what? I don't think so. And the reason for that is because I love Usyk. I genuinely love his style and love everything about him. I don't see him beating Fury, because Fury's not. He wouldn't have a similar style to Usyk, but he's a boxer, but a bigger boxer, and he'd be smart enough to go to Usyk and force him to fight hard. And I think that he'd be able to pick him off and he'd push him down and kind of a Klitschko-esque performance on him. I think I don't see him beating Fury.
Yeah, even though Fury could get hit on the chin by Wilder.
Well, that's an hard thing. So, I suppose then that could. I see him beating. He could beat Wilder certainly. So yeah. if Wilder chins Fury, which he could well do, I think I would fancy Usyk in a Wilder fight. Who knows? My head's fried trying to think about it. I don't really know what's going to happen, Steve.
Well, because it's alternative universes, and somewhere there's Dillian Whyte and Joe Joyce doing whatever they're doing. The way Dillian and Joe Joyce pick their fights, they'll end up fighting each other in front of 20,000 people without a belt at stake, but hopefully making plenty of money. Now, I mentioned earlier on that Chris Eubank relaunches Sky as a boxing platform. A bit of a broadcast battle going on at the moment with DAZN, their schedule, obviously BT still ticking over, and more importantly, Sky really launching, going out and grabbing an awful lot of fighters and putting together an awful lot of creative fights, especially with the top ranked fights through the night. We've got Eubank on Saturday night in the type of fight that we've come to expect really from Eubank, against a German with a decent record and a decent stoppage ratio called Sven Elbeer. We don't know very much about him. He's beaten the guys you'd expect him to beat, but it's very much the Chris Eubank Jr. show. He's somehow 32, Chris Eubank Jr. He seemed to be 24 forever. He's still a player on the scene, isn't he, Carl?
Yeah, I think he is, but I think, well, first of all, it's great to have Sky back involved, and I think it's always good that there's competition between all these channels, and they kind of have to, we've got DAZN, BT, Sky.
Channel 5 put 5 shows as well.
Yeah, but so they all need to compete. They need to be putting on good shows. And I think that I'm a bit disappointed with the opponent, coming back, Sky back with a bang. We've got Eubank, but the opponent is poor, really, really poor.
Yeah.
And like you said, I don't know much about this guy. So without actually seeing him, I'm expecting Eubank to beat him convincingly. Because that's the way it normally happens when you don't know about someone. They're not that good typically. But it's just, Eubank, he needs to get a move on because he isn't the prospect anymore. He is 32, and time really isn't on his side. I think an interesting fight that could be made, and especially with the backing of Sky and the power of Sky, and he's called for it for quite a while, and now he needs to, put up or shut up, is a Golovkin fight. Now, I would favour Golovkin in a fight with Eubank right now still, even though Golovkin's as old as my dad. But that fight could be made now with Sky, and it'll be interesting to see whether they push for it or not.
Yeah, and that would be a terrific fight. I think the fans are really, really warm to that. Yeah, I'm a bit disappointed in the opponent, not because he's particularly bad, but I mean, it's at times like this that I always go back to the way that Mickey Duff ran his business, or the way that Frank Warren ran his business for the first couple of decades. Is you always bring in Americans with a little bit of history, because they do several things. They offer you a look back to when they were maybe dangerous 5 years earlier, so you could do a comparison. But more than that, they deliver at press conferences. In the old days, even before social media, we were dependent on those Tuesday and Wednesday press conferences. And if you get an American in and he fills your head with the men he's sparred with and the guys he's beaten, we kind of still like it. No disrespect to Sven Ilbert, but you look at the men he's beaten, and he's beaten all the men you'd expect him to beat, and any other super middles or middles in this country. So listen, it's great that Sky are back. It's not a criticism of Sky. It's great they're back. Looking forward to seeing Savannah Marshall, Yuri Fury getting a bit of profile. Some of the top ranked fights are absolutely fantastic. Herring against Shakir Stevenson in October. That's a terrific scrap. It's got my interest. So it's absolutely brilliant. And I know that some of the main events on BT have not been that good, and I know that some of the main events on DAZN this summer have not been that good. So don't go crazy. But it's just that if we'd have had, I don't know, Chris Eubank against some former middleweight champion from 5 or 6 years ago, it'd have been brilliant. It would have been, we used to have a word on Fleet Street called sexy, and it meant, I like that, and it meant you could get the story in the paper. Carl, what's your week like this week? What are you up to?
I'm with you, Yamta, tomorrow.
Oh, of course, yeah, we're doing this.
Me and John Fury on a bus.
On an open-top bus driving around Manchester. Yeah, that makes an awful lot of sense. That's a beautiful bit of planning. How is that even possible? I'd forgotten about that.
What else am I doing? On Wednesday, I'm doing a podcast with Monty Panesar.
Oh, brilliant, Monty. Say hello to him for me. I like Monty.
Will do. And
that's a busy. So you that what a mixture that is. You're doing a pod with Monty Panesar, and you're driving around Manchester in the rain with me and Gypsy Johnny Fury on the top of a bus. Oh boy, the jewels of winning a world title and being a former world champion. You get to work with me and Monty and Gypsy John and the weather in Manchester. Yeah. Carl, listen, thanks for joining me.
Thanks, Steve.
Thanks as ever to Carl Frampton. I love Carl. He's got great insight, and every now and again he just drops in a real nugget. Well, that was the review, I suppose, of 60 or 69,000 people at Tottenham Hotspur Stadium watching Anthony Joshua lose all of his titles in what was an odd performance and a brilliant performance from Usyk. Where do we go from here? Well, I'm not sure. I know where I go from here. I go with young Jack to Las Vegas. Yes, I do. Yes, we do. For the start of Tyson Fury, Deontay Wilder 3, the start of the week. Now, the pod next week might end up coming out on the Tuesday morning because of the time difference and because of how long it takes me to walk from my room in one hotel to Jack's room in another hotel, grab a pizza and a bottle of water, spend a fortune buying a coffee, and actually sit down somewhere quiet where we don't get moved on by security guards to record the thing. So it might be Monday, but it'll probably be Tuesday. Pod number 1 from fight number 3. I've been Steve Bunce. This has been the 5 Live Boxing Podcast. Thanks for downloading. Thanks for listening.